It's a lazy day today. Going to make sticky toffee pudding because I got the stuff to make it for 4th of July, and then I'm making it for church tomorrow instead. So very excited about that. And just a lazy day. I'll probably go get gas. I'm doing my laundry, and yeah. I wanted to go to the beach today, but it is so cloudy and rainy outside, and so I'm over it. Every weekend I've had free here, it's been raining. Like 4th of July was the only time I saw sun. I've just given up. Stunned by your beauty. Bon appetit. This was one of my favorite meals growing up as a kid. My mom is originally from Jamaica, and she, obviously since Jamaica is a British colony, used to be, I feel like we grew up kind of having some dishes that were very, very British, but we didn't realize. And so we would have eggs and baked beans for dinner pretty frequently, never for breakfast, only for dinner. And on my 10th birthday, I got to choose like what meal I wanted to eat out of like everything, and I chose eggs and baked beans because it was one of my favorites. So I always feel super nostalgic when I eat it. It's so good. But you have to get the Bushman's vegetarian baked beans. It's not just any baked beans. It is specifically the vegetarian ones that don't taste like barbecue, because it ruins the vibe. A few weeks ago, I asked people like on my Instagram if they had any questions they wanted to ask me. So kind of going off of like my mom being from Jamaica, somebody asked me about like our Asian heritage. And it's very interesting because my great grandparents, originally from China, are from Guangzhou, which is in like the southern part of China. And my great grandfather moved to Jamaica for work, which is super common back in the day. So he moved to Jamaica, Kingston for work, and then mail order brided my great grandmother, because in Chinese culture, it's very important for you to marry someone from your hometown. So they gave him like 3 girls to choose from their town, and he chose my great grandmother. She came on a boat to Jamaica, met him for the first time, and we would always be like, oh my gosh, Potai, like, what did you think? Like, when you saw him, like, you never met him, you're marrying him. And she just was like, oh, I mean, he looked strong, like, he could work, and he had nice teeth. Dang, like, we are just so picky these days. Then they had kids, all born in Jamaica. Yeah, they all grew up. It's very common for you to grow up in Jamaica and then go away for college, because there's universities there, are just not a lot of good opportunity. So a lot of kids go to Canada or Europe or America for college. And so a lot of my grandmother's siblings left and came back and all that stuff. But my grandmother always kind of stayed in Jamaica. And that's where she met her husband, which was a like British officer. And then they had my mom and her 2 brothers all in Jamaica. And then my mom came to Florida to go to university, and that's where she met my dad at college in Florida. And then she stayed here, and then eventually a lot of my mom's family actually moved to Florida as well. And yeah, so that's kind of how it all happened, how we all got there. So we grew up visiting Jamaica a lot as kids to visit my grandmother, my popo, and it was just like the coolest thing. I loved it. And there's actually like some of the best Asian food I've ever had is been in Jamaica. I always talk about my mom, never talk about my dad. But my dad is originally from Florida. My dad's family has been in Florida since before it was a state, basically. My dad's grandfather is the one who moved from Michigan to Florida, like bought land sight unseen, in the middle of like swamps and built up the land. He basically tried to like have potato crops and like have a farm. I don't think that worked out. So then he ended up switching to cattle, and he had a cattle farm, like a milk farm. The first dairy farm in South Florida. My grandfather grew up kind of like dropping milk off at people's houses, and that kind of started this whole thing with my grandfather. When he got a little bit older, he got super involved in government and politics and all that stuff, and would attach like different articles and things to the milk bottles when he dropped it off at people's houses, and was very much about if you want to like if you want to make a difference in the world, like get involved in your government, get involved in your politics, because that is the one thing that kind of makes or breaks like a society. The dairy farm stayed a dairy farm until World War II, and then they actually donated it to the state to be used as a base, like an air base, a naval base, where they would do like practices and runs, but they also had it so they could kind of go out from Florida. So it ended up being like a military base for a while. And then once that ended, the government was going to give it back. And my grandfather was like, no, you can keep it, but it must be used for education, because education is the one thing that changes the world, and everybody should have access to education. So they were huge proponents of everyone having equal access to education. And so now, like in South Florida, there's a huge part in the city of Davie that's kind of all universities. It's like 5 or 4 different universities. There's charter schools, there's public schools, there's trade schools, kind of all in one spot. And that is where the land was, and that's why all of that is kind of like an education hub, because that was like the one stipulation my grandfather had when talking about it with the state, which is actually really cool. I mean, I went to school there. All of us went to school to those universities that were built on that land, which is really cool because we all kind of got to reap the benefits of there being universities there. I guess my dad's side's pretty cool too. We're gonna make sticky toffee pudding, which is a British cake-ish thing. It's something that I used to make all the time when I used to work as a head baker at the bakery that I used to work at in Florida, and it is one of the biggest dessert hits that I have learned to make. We're gonna make it for church tomorrow. I'm working with limited resources. He doesn't have a whisk, which is usually something that I need. We're just gonna see how it goes. The sticky toffee pudding is made mostly from dates. So it's a very natural sweet cake. It's not like overly sweet, which I think is why it's so popular. Also, I don't have a food processor, so I'm gonna hope that this Ninja works. Okay, TikTok taught me if there's powder, it's mold, so I'm not gonna use this one. So we're using a fork for the dry. Whisk. I can't love you in the dark. It feels like we're oceans apart. There is so much space between us, and baby, we're already defeated. Yeah, 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 yeah. And everything changed me. Okay, well, ignore this, needs to be cleaned. Oh my gosh, it's so pretty. I always think it's super interesting because you never know how much sugar and butter goes into the stuff you eat until you make it. And it's actually kind of foul sometimes, like how much sugar and butter goes into stuff, and like we don't even bat an eye. Sometimes I guess ignorance is bliss.
I went on a walk to finish out the evening, talked on the phone with my mom for a little bit, and made some chook for dinner that the Kims had left, and started Extraordinary Attorney Woo.